Today we will look at another very interesting game played by Magnus Carlsen. In this game, Magnus literally ignored the rules of development and left his king in the center without castling. Let's see what came of it. So, knight f3. Reti's debut. Magnus, with his first move, knight f3, does not want to show how he is going to play. d5 answers Wesley, so d4, knight f6, bishop f4, bishop f5. After the move e3 we get the London system. e6, c4 Carlsen answered. And it is with this move that interesting events begin. Black has the opportunity to take the knight on b1 and create certain difficulties for white with castling. This is exactly what they do. The knight takes to b1. Check on b4 is threatening. White goes for it, deciding to take the bishop with the queen. The queen takes on b1. Bishop b4 check. Magnus retreats. King d1. Why was it impossible to defend against the check with a knight? Because the move knight e4 followed and white lost a piece. If white had taken on b1 not with the queen, but with the rook, there would have been the same move. Bishop b4 check, knight d2. Knight e4 and white would still feel bad, parrying the move queen a4 check with knight c6. It's better here, but not much. Rook d1 and the choice is to either win the exchange or continue to press. Play queen h4. The bishop fulfilled its mission perfectly, depriving white of castling, and now Wesley decides to exchange it. Bishop d6. This probably makes sense, since white's opponent looks much more active. Magnus does not want to lose such an active bishop and ties up the knight. Bishop g5. Black answers h6, as if asking, "What are you going to do? Keep the pin or go for an exchange?" losing the advantage of two bishops. Carlsen chooses the second option. The bishop takes f6. The queen takes f6, and takes d5. Somewhat unexpectedly, it seemed more logical to play c5, pushing back the black bishop, especially since the white king was stuck in the center and not protected by anyone. And now we'll see what Magnus is up to. The pawn takes d5 and follows e4. White opens up the center as much as possible. Black doesn't have time to castle because e5 is threatening. Capturing the e4 pawn is also bad. The queen takes e4, check, takes the b7 pawn, and black will not be able to save the rook. If you play queen c6, then the killer will follow. Bishop b5. Magnus moves bishop b5, check, forcing black to close with a pawn. If it were e5 right away, black would have a good answer with queen b6. And it is unclear how white can further develop his initiative, since black simply castles. c6. Now you can also e5. Queen f4, bishop d3, and, if castling is now, then king e2, f6, g3, queen g4, h3 and queen c8 with white's advantage. Therefore, Wesley decides to immediately undermine white's pawn center. c5, d takes c5, knight c6 develops the knight, and clouds begin, but nothing critical. Queen c1, protecting the pawn and offering an exchange of queens, because after this white will have a slight advantage. Black does not want to change Queen b4, because the white king is in the center and would like to attack it somehow. a3, the queen takes c5, restoring the material balance. King e2, knight d4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and thus Wesley avoids the exchange, simultaneously attacking the pawn e5. f4, Magnus reinforces her. Black castles. The white king in the center and the weak black squares around it with the opponent's dark squared bishop are cause for concern. Queen d2 is played by white, creating a threat. Bishop h7 check. Queen b6, rook h, e1, f6 with the idea of opening the f-file. Magnus does not allow opening the file by sacrificing a pawn, e6. The queen takes e6, and the king f3. The white king is absolutely not afraid of his opponents, moving to the center of the board with 4 pieces. The queen retreats to e7, the rook d1 with pressure on the isolated pawn and the threat of the bishop c4. Rook a, d8, queen e3, bishop d6, bishop g6, h5. Black is trying to isolate the bishop. But Magnus immediately destroys this idea. Queen e6, check, exchange of queens, and white moves into a favorable endgame, because black's pawns are weak. Bishop c5, rook e5 attack on 2 pawns. Rook h6 somehow we need to become more active. Bishop takes pawn h5, bishop d6, rook d takes pawn d5, king f7, rook now needs to be removed, rook e4, g6, bishop g4, h5, bishop h3, rook e8. Rook d4, bishop e5, rook b4, g5. Strong move. Magnus makes a difficult decision. He strengthens the f4 pawn, sacrificing the bishop, threatening g4 check. But Wesley prefers to play b6. Why? In case 38.
Pawn g5, g4. Bishop h3 takes pawn g4. Pawn h5 takes bishop g4. King f3 takes pawn g4. Rook f6, g6. King g4, f3. Bishop e5, d6. Rook b4 takes pawn b7. Rook e8, e7. Rook b7 takes rook e7. Bishop d6 takes rook e7. Rook d5, a5. Pawn a7, a6. Pawn h2, h4. Rook g6, d6. Pawn b2, b4.
White has an advantage.
Rook d5, d7. King f7, f8. Rook d7, h7. Pawn g5, g4. Bishop h3 takes pawn g4. pawn h5 takes bishop g4. King f3 takes pawn g4.
As we can see, Carlsen simply forced his opponent to take the bishop for 2 pawns.
Bishop e5, d6. Rook b4, c4. Pawn a7, a5. Rook c4, c6. King f8, g8. Rook h7, b7. Bishop d6, e5. Rook c6 takes pawn b6. Rook f6 takes rook b6. Rook b7 takes rook b6. Bishop e5, d4. Rook b6, b5. Rook e8, e2. Pawn b2, b3. Rook e2 takes pawn h2. Rook b5 takes pawn a5. Rook h2, e2. Rook a5, d5. Bishop d4, b2. Pawn a3, a4. Bishop b2, c3. King g4, f5. Rook e2, e8. Pawn g3, g4. Rook e8, f8. King f5, e4. Rook f8, b8. Rook d5, b5. Rook b8, e8. King e4, d3. Bishop c3, e1. Pawn a4, a5. Bishop e1, f2. Pawn b3, b4. Rook e8, e3. King d3, c4. Rook e3, e4. King c4, b3. King g8, f7.
Can't take a pawn, otherwise.
Rook e4 takes pawn f4. Rook b5, f5. Rook f4 takes rook f5. Pawn g4 takes rook f5. King g8, f8. King b3, c4. King f8, e7. Pawn a5, a6. Bishop f2, e3. King c4, d5. King e7, d7. King d5, e4. Bishop e3, a7. Pawn f5, f6. King d7, e6. Pawn b4, b5. Bishop a7, b6. Pawn f6, f7. King e6 takes pawn f7. King e4, d5. King f7, f6. King d5, c6. Bishop b6, e3. Pawn b5, b6. King f6, e5. Pawn a6, a7. Rook b5, e5. Rook e4, d4. Pawn b4, b5. Rook d4, d3. King b3, c2. Rook d3, g3. Pawn g4, g5. Bishop f2, d4. Rook e5, d5. Bishop d4, e3. Rook d5, d3. Rook g3, g2. King c2, b3. Bishop e3, c1. Pawn b5, b6. King f7, e6. Rook d3, d4. Rook g2, b2. King b3, a4. King e6, f5.
And it would seem that black was able to resist.
Rook d4, b4. Rook b2, a2. King a4, b5. Bishop c1 takes pawn f4.
Obviously, Wesley misjudged the position, as a killer move followed.
Rook b4 takes bishop f4. King f5 takes rook f4. Pawn b6, b7.
And after this move, So admitted defeat. Here's an interesting game. Magnus Carlsen with the king in the center. If you liked the review, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, write a comment and like it.